I just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining our webinar, Residency Real Talk with Dr. Desai. We're really excited to have you guys tonight as we're going to be talking about the topic of the residency interview. Additionally, with that, we asked you guys to send us your questions, so we're going to be happily answering those tonight. And additionally, if you guys have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Any of your questions will be remaining anonymous, so no worries about that. And we just wanted to say thank you for being a part of our MDB Connect family. So just to introduce myself, if you don't already know me, my name is Alyssa Harlow, and I am the Director of Marketing at MDB Connect. And with us tonight, we have Dr. Samir Desai, the co-founder of MDB Connect, as well as Dr. Rajani, the co-author of The Successful Match. And additionally, with that, who's not here with us tonight, you guys are always welcome to reach out to any of us, but I just wanted to introduce Mr. Manish Savnas, who is also the co-founder of MD2B Connect, as well as Dan Morris, our Director of Client Services. And additionally with that, we have Ryan Downey, who is our VP of Editorial Services. So while they're not with us tonight, I just wanted to make it known that you guys can reach out to any one of us with any questions that you may have. We are always here for you in this journey, and we want to help you guys. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So with that said, I think I will pass it off to you, Dr. Desai.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. I wanted to welcome all of our rotators to another webinar of Residency Real Talk. We're really excited to have all of you. I know that some of you may be joining us for the first time and doing your first rotation with us. If so, a special welcome to you as well. And at MD2B Connect, we are big believers in supporting all of you through this journey. So that, of course, means the rotation experience, but also beyond the rotation experience. And we do that in different ways, one of which is this webinar, but we also wanted to bring your attention to some other resources that I think you will all find very, very useful. Of course, most of you have our book, The Successful Match. And for those of you who are new rotators, you'll be getting that very, very soon. But in that book, there are 150 plus pages of residency interview information, including content on how to develop compelling answers to some very, very high yield type questions. And so we have that as a resource. But in addition to that, I also want to point you to one of our websites, thesuccessfulmatch.com, where there's an extensive blog on residency interviewing, as well as other topics related to matching successfully into residency. And that blog serves to complement the Successful Match book. So there's a lot there that is high yield and very, very powerful in terms of giving you an inside look into what programs and interviewers are looking for in the interview. And there's also a podcast on the successfulmatch.com website called Success in Medicine, where we devote entire episodes to different aspects of the residency interview. And this webinar today is about the residency interview. Again, as if you've been joining us for the last few webinars, this is an ongoing series on the residency interview, and because it's residency interview season, and a lot of the questions that I've been getting from you are centered on the interview. So this is an opportunity for us to answer as many questions as we can about that. And we thank you so much for submitting so many wonderful questions. And we're going to try to get through as many of those as we can here tonight. But before we begin, I want to also let my colleague and my co-author of The Successful Match, Dr. Rajani, say hello.
Thank you, Samir. I'm so excited to be here tonight, and we received a number of great questions ahead of time that we're really looking forward to discussing more, and we welcome your questions. That's what we're here for. So looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. And Alyssa, before I turn it over to you, I just wanted to let all of our listeners know that Dr. Kata and I have decades of experience serving as residency interviewers. I am a faculty member at the Baylor College of Medicine, where I served on the residency selection committee. So, we bring that type of experience to you. Dr. Kata has in the past been a residency selection committee member in the Department of Dermatology at Baylor. So we're really excited to be here to give you our insight. So Alyssa, with that, I will hand it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Desai and Dr. Kata. I did also want to mention real quick before we get started that I'm going to be sharing multiple links to blog posts, videos, websites in the chat. So please feel free to use those as I send them out. There can be anything useful for you guys to use during your interview process. So with that being said, I think we're going to start off with some of the questions that we received. So our first question that we received from the Google form was, how do you see yourself in 5 years?
Okay, so this is a very common question. It can be asked as how do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? So they can put different time points into this question. And so you obviously want to prepare accordingly. Now, if they ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? The first step, of course, is thinking about what specialty you're going for, because each specialty has a different duration of training. So for some specialties, you may still be in residency at the end of 5 years, but most of you will be going after specialties in which you will be 1 to 2 years out, 5 years from now. So then how to answer this question? The typical answer that applicants will give will have something to do with subspecialty. Will they be doing this fellowship or that fellowship? If not subspecialty, what will their practice setting be 5 years after starting residency? Will it be academics? Will it be private practice? And so typically people will create an answer that includes content related to those areas. Now, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is something that interviewers are looking for. But one of the things that I encourage interviewees to do when crafting this answer is to also include additional information. Because many interviewees are not entirely sure what subspecialty they're going to go into. So when they're commenting on that, it can be a very, very general answer. But there are some things that applicants tend to have a better idea about. For example, if you have a very, very deep interest in teaching, you may know right now that part of what you're going to do in 5 years involves teaching. And if that's the case, one of your points for this answer could be something very specific related to how you want to incorporate teaching as a part of what you do 5 years from now. So, for example, when they say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? You could say, one thing that I'm very passionate about is teaching, having had experiences to teach others during my US clinical experiences, but also in other experiences as well. So for example, I've been part of a USMLE group from my country, and together we support each other along the way. And my role in that group has been to create lectures of value to our group, and I've really enjoyed doing that. And that's something that I see myself continuing to do in 5 years. Uh, and so something very specific where you right now, based on what you have experienced and felt about yourself, you can offer that balances some of the other things that you may not be so sure about. So look at it from that perspective. So whether you have a passion for teaching or advocacy or community service or research, those are some of the points that you can weave in with your subspecialty interest or your practice setting.
And I'll jump in here, Samir. Alyssa in the chat has included a link to our YouTube videos that have a before and after example response of where do you see yourself in 15 years. So it's a slightly different, it is a different question, but you can see in these videos how we approach that question. And what you'll notice in the before and after videos is that we also include our step-by-step approach for how to think about this. And part of that is what Dr. Desai just talked about, which is really identifying an area of excellence or an area of interest, whether it is, as he mentioned, education, advocacy, or something else, so that you're giving a fuller response than just, this is the specialty that I would like to be in. So I'd recommend that you take a look at those videos. They're pretty quick, and you'll find, Alyssa has included that in the chat.
Okay, thank you both for your answers. So if there are no questions on that, we will move on to our next question. I did just want to reiterate, if you guys have any questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat. We want to help you as best we can, and we want to get to all of your questions. So please, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. So with that said, our next question is, what can I do when waitlisted for an interview to better my chances of obtaining the interview?
Right. So that's a great question. So sometimes when you find yourself and you're on the wait list, you are thinking to yourself, is there anything at all that I can do? Do I remain a passive player, so to speak, and just wait this out? Or can I do something to influence my chances of getting off the wait list and getting that interview that I so covet? And so a lot depends on the program and what the program has communicated with you. Now, there are some programs that when they put you on the wait list, they are very, very specific and they indicate that they don't want to be communicate. They don't want people to communicate with them in any way. Now, most programs don't necessarily have that uh, as a point that they want applicants to follow. So you have usually have the leeway of communicating with them, and I would encourage you to communicate with them every so often. And the idea is not to communicate with them too frequently, but it's okay to let them know about your ongoing interest. And how frequently should something like that happen? I would say once a month. So let's say in the month of October, you were put on the wait list, and now it's November. You can craft a very, very specific email which reiterates your interest in that particular program. Now, that of course has to be done well because any communications you have with a residency program uh, can be considered part of your interview. So, quality of that email that you send, how well it's written, everything needs to be done well, but that has the chance to potential, so to speak, to influence their decision making. Now, in that email, you can provide an update. So many of you are doing different things, and those things may not have found themselves into your AirAS applications just because of timing. So you might have a publication that's now available, or perhaps you're involved in some very notable activity. This is an opportunity in this email to communicate that, especially if what you're doing uh, ties in very nicely to the program. So if you have 3 or 4 things that are going on, you can decide which one of those things you choose to share. But that's an example of an update that you can include in that email that can change your profile and sway programs to get you off the wait list and into a real interview. Now, so I would recommend once a month. I would also be strategic as you move through the interview season. So if you are waitlisted somewhere and you can use the weeks ahead to do some networking and meet somebody who has a tie to the program or knows something about the program, and you have a chance to learn from that person, then that can also be included in another email. So maybe your December email is going to be something about someone that you've met and what you've learned and how that really resonates with you. So I think the idea here is to not be afraid to communicate with them as long as they're willing, but to be very, very thoughtful in how you do that. And Rajni, yeah, you have something to add.
I do. Samir, can you give us an example of how you would word that email? Let's say I was able to have a conversation with a faculty member at the residency program, and I found out more about their residency teaching workshop. Can you give us an example of how you would put that in an email?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you would essentially say, dear Dr. Smith, uh, I am communicating with you to reiterate my ongoing interest in your internal medicine residency program. I was so excited to receive a waitlist position for an interview, and I just wanted to provide you with an update on my situation. At this point, if there is a bit of an update, you can give that, and then you can move into your conversation that you've had with somebody. So if you've talked to Dr. Jones, you can say, I recently also spoke with Dr. Jones, who is a physician that's practicing in your community. And he was speaking very, very highly of your program's emphasis on teaching. He pointed out to me how a special part of your curriculum involves workshops in helping residents develop as teachers. And as someone who has a background in teaching, when I was a resident back in China, this is something that really appeals to me. And so you can make something specific related to what your background is in teaching, and then that shows that fit between you and that program. And what Dr. Kata has mentioned about reaching out to somebody and getting something specific, that shows that your interest is very deep because you are going to extra efforts to learn about the program.
That was a great example of how you would write that, how you would craft that email. Thank you.
Okay. So on to our next question. Our next question is, how to stand out in an interview if I have just one?
So first of all, plenty of people have matched with just one interview. Now, certainly the hope is, if you're right now looking at one interview, that there are more to come. And there's a real good chance that that can happen. The season is certainly not over, and many interview invitations are extended in the months of November. That's a big, big interview invitation month. And then certainly also December and January, not to the degree that October and November are in terms of giving interviews, but people definitely get interviews in December and January. So it is not over. But if you are in the situation where you only have one interview, as I said, you can definitely make something happen here. So it's all about working as hard as you can to be the best interviewee that you can be. And if you put your heart and soul into this, just like you put your heart and soul into everything that you've done to this point, and you've come so far, you can do the same thing with your interview prep. And part of that involves doing a lot of research about the program. You want to take the attitude that I'm going to know more about this program than anybody else that's going to be interviewing there. And the more you know, the better your answers can be crafted. So even though you can craft answers that you use for every program, the same answers for questions in every program, there can be adjustments that you make in your answers that tailor your answers to a particular program. And that's essentially what you can do if you have one interview, or if you have multiple interviews, because you can do that for any program. But the more you show that you have a fit with that program, and the more they feel that you really want to be there, and that you're somebody who's going to contribute, and that last part of contributing is also big, then that is really going to speak to them about you as an applicant. Because remember, if you have that interview there, that means they're considering you seriously for a position. They like you. Now it's about how to convey fit, how to show them your motivation and your desire to make deep contributions, how to sort of bring that to life through the answers that you develop. Rajani, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I see we do have a blog post about why are you interested. I think we did one on why are you interested in this medical school and why are you interested in this residency program. And that sort of lays out a couple of, it gives an example of how you can research a program very deeply to start learning about what makes the program unique and what you can highlight. It's really all about your fit with the program. So that researching the residency program, as Dr. Desai mentioned, is a real key part.
And let me add to what I was saying a little bit so that I think it becomes even more clear. So in your tell me about yourself answer, you can layer it with things that would be particularly appealing to that particular program. If you're asked what are your strengths, you may have developed an answer that you're going to use at all programs, but then when you do an in-depth analysis of their program and you really pick up on some strengths that you think would resonate better with the program, and you feel you share those strengths, then you recraft your strengths answer, layering that content into that answer. So you're almost strategically looking at each question as it relates to that one program. And you can do that throughout your answers to, so many questions. So it's going to become very apparent to the interviewer, to the PD, that you are somebody that's going to mesh very, very well with them. And that's what I mean by being strategic.
Okay. Any additional statements you wanted to make to that, Dr. Kata? Okay. And I know that I added a lot of links in the chat, but those are also just ways that you guys can perfect your interviewing and just some small things that you can work on as well if you need to. So for our next question, we have, if asked about personal views on a controversial topic such as abortion, should such views be explicitly expressed or should it be avoided?
So I think I'll take this one. I have a blog post about how to approach ethical questions. Now, Dr. Desai and myself have written a book for pre-medical students who are applying for medical school called the MMI. And the MMI is a really interesting type of interview that some medical schools require. But one of the reasons we've thought about this particular question about abortion is because in an MMI, sometimes some of the stations bring up ethical questions. Now, in a residency interview, it's pretty unusual to hear about ethical questions. However, at this point in time, the issue of abortion is an important one. Let's say you're applying to an OB-GYN residency program in Texas. They might want to ask you about that. So we don't have any clear-cut data. So what I'm presenting to you is purely opinion. So I don't really have any data because this is the first time really that we're seeing this even being an issue here. So how I would approach it is, so some of this depends on your own personal beliefs, and some of it depends on your program's setting. So, for example, the safest response to this would not be to come down hard and take a moral position or a religious position. In cases of abortion, and this is a residency interview, I would really stick with the medical aspects of it. That's the safest position. You do not know who's going to be interviewing you. You don't know what their beliefs are, and it doesn't matter if they're in Texas or New York City. You don't know what this individual believes. And so really, I would say in order to be safe, to really keep the conversation focused on medical issues. So if, for example, it's an OB-GYN program, I think you could talk about the fact that, when it comes to abortion as defined by the U.S. medical system, what you're really concerned about is making sure that you're available, that your training includes miscarriage, let's say the care of miscarriage, which is an issue that is definitely being talked about a lot right now. And there have been cases already of women who have died because they were having, let's say, a miscarriage, but the physician was not able to perform a D&C. So I think the safest response to this would really be to focus on the medical aspects of abortion and to try to stay away from any discussion of religious or moral beliefs about it. Samir, did you want to add something to that?
I would say that is the safest. I think some of this depends on how they ask you this question. balance is always good when you're talking about ethical issues because you can try to understand all sides of the issue. And that is something that also can be presented in your answer depending upon how it is asked. So balance, what do people on one side of the issue, what are they saying, and what are some of the reasons that they see that, and what are people on the other side saying, and what is their reasoning for saying that? Because a lot of times when people ask ethical questions, it's not that they expect you to have this figured out. If anybody has this figured out, right, it wouldn't be as big of an issue as it is. But what they're trying to understand is, do you have an understanding of the issue? Is your understanding very, very superficial, or is there some depth to your understanding? And I think if you can express that, that is also very well received.
Okay. Are you guys ready for the next question?
We are.
Okay. Our next
Oh.
question, go ahead.
Oh, and actually, I will say, if you're not familiar with the basic ethical, if you are not familiar with the 4 basic ethical principles that underlie the practice of medicine, that is baseline knowledge that you should have. And so I do have, it's a quick read blog post that you can quickly read to prepare yourself for ethical principles underlying the practice of medicine. And that's probably you don't need to read deeply because ethical principles you're not going to be grilled on these, but it is good to have a working knowledge of those. So if you would check out that blog post, I think you'll find that helpful.
Yeah, I'll try to add it into the chat too after we ask this question. So our next question kind of has 2 parts. So it says, if a red flag such as a low score is already addressed in the personal statement, should it A, be brought up voluntarily even if it's not asked in the interview, or B, be brought up if asked of a failure, or should the focus be shifted onto something else to avoid appearance of a fixated insecurity?
Right. So I'm a big believer of bringing up areas of concern during an interview. And the reason I advocate for that is that that area of concern is known to the program. They have read your application, they're aware of that area of concern, but they do like you, right? You've got an interview there. Now your goal is to be ranked as highly as you can. And the interviewers that you're going to meet, let's say you're interviewing for internal medicine and you're going to have 3 interviews. So 3 different interviewers. Those people, I would look at them as your advocates at that program. So what they are going to do is they're going to rate you on the interview scoring sheet. And everybody's rating form is going to be different. But then that scoring sheet is going to be presented to the larger selection committee. So there's going to be a meeting at some point, and issues like red flags are going to come up. And if somebody has a concern and they have not met you, they were not one of your interviewers, then they're going to lean on those who have gotten to know you, your interviewers, to help clarify those issues. But if the interviewers don't have the information from you, then they can't advocate for you as strongly as you would like them to do so. And so bringing up the issue and allowing them to understand what happened, speaking about it in a mature, positive way, and focusing on the growth you've had because of the experience and the lessons you've learned and how this has made you stronger can go a long way into giving the interviewer exactly what he or she needs to fight for you as an athlete. So I would view the interviewer as your advocate. Now, some interviewers, many interviewers, will bring this issue up. So you'll have a chance to address it. But it's not unusual for people not to bring it up. So if they don't bring it up, then your question becomes, if I want to bring it up, when is the right time? I encourage people not to bring it up too early because I would rather have you focus on the strong points and the positives. There's so many positives that each of you is bringing to a program. And I would love for that initial focus to be centered on all of that. Because if you can get all that out, then you're going to be making this very favorable impression on the interviewer. So then when it's time to bring up this aspect of your background that you need to discuss, you're doing it at a more opportune time for you in the interview. Now, should you bring that up as an answer to a question, as Alyssa was saying, you know, I think you said, Alyssa, that was, tell me about a failure or mistake, right? That was the question. So if somebody asks you that, okay, yes, you could use this story, whatever happened to you with that red flag, as the basis of your answer. But the problem could be is if that question is asked very early, you have not had a chance to get all those positives out there. So I like to have people create a separate answer, not dealing with your red flag, for tell me about a failure, as well as a second answer for tell me about your failure that deals with your red flag, and then use the right one depending upon when in the interview that question is asked. If it's in the latter half of your interview and they say, hey, tell me about a time you failed, I think that could be a good time to bring it up. Now, if they don't ask you that question, the way you can bring it up is when they say towards the end of the interview, do you have any questions for me? Then you can say, Dr. Garcia, before I ask you a few questions, is it okay if I bring up something that we haven't yet had a chance to talk about? And then you can bring up the issue that you're concerned about.
Yeah, and so just to answer your question, it was specifically an example as a step score failure.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by red flag is if it's a step score issue, you then can craft an answer for tell me about a time you failed, and then decide whether to use it or not based on when that question is asked during your interview. And if it's asked early in the interview, you might choose to not address that, and then later on you can bring it up.
Okay. Any input for that, Dr. Kutta?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So we will move on to our next question. And the question is the use of earbuds for better audio quality or in the event of unexpected or unexpected heavy rainfall strictly prohibited, or is the use always dependent on the individual program?
So that's a good question because I love it when people are thinking about the technical aspects of the virtual interview. So Dr. Kata and I have devoted blog posts and podcast episodes to not just your answers, but all the other aspects of the virtual interview experience that contribute to the impression you're making. So we have to be thinking about technological issues, audio, all of those issues. And so what I would tell you is that there are no specific overarching guidelines that say that headphones or earbuds are prohibited. Now, if a program comes out and says, we prefer that you not do this or that, then that's something that you have to incorporate into your preparation for that particular program. But what's essential here is that you can hear them clearly and they can hear you clearly, because you don't want problems from a technological standpoint to interfere with the message that you're trying to get across, because you've worked so hard to craft these strong answers. Rajini, do you have any other things to add there?
No, I would say I would second what you said, which is that it's great that you're thinking so much about these technical issues of the virtual interviews. And if you have not yet, I know we've mentioned this in several other webinars, but it is really helpful to read through our 2 blog posts on preparing for the virtual interview and acing the virtual interview.
Okay, so on to our next question. I have how to get noticed by residency programs.
So obviously we're devoting this session to the interview. So I'm assuming that this question is related to being noticed by programs um, in terms of getting interviews and then perhaps from your interview performance. I will interpret it in those 2 ways. So in terms of getting noticed after you have turned in your application at this point in time, there's a few things that you can do. Number 1, you can send emails of interest to programs like we talked about. And this is the right time to do it. And you can do that so long as a program doesn't say, we don't want this type of communication. So that's one thing you can do. A second thing you can do is work on your network, building your network. You all have people that you know who are in different places, who may have ties to this program or that program. And there are people that you have yet to meet that are out there. And so this networking is something that should be ongoing throughout the interview season, because a person in your network can not only help you get an interview in October or November, but they can help you get interviews in December and January. And people who have gotten interviews in even late January because of an email of interest or some person in their network that advocate for them have actually matched at those programs. So these are some things you can do to attract the interest of programs. And then as far as being noticed by the programs themselves, of course, in an interview, that's all related to that quality of interview prep that you are all putting your heart and soul into. And that's what we're all talking about right now.
Okay, so our next question, speaking of interviews, is how many interviews is a safe number for matching?
So that really depends on the specialty. It also depends on whether you're a US IMG or a non-US IMG. And it also depends on your personal profile. So your strengths as an applicant, whether you have some areas of concern. But a great place to start is to take a look at charting outcomes in the match, because in that document for every specialty, they will show you the data on number of interviews and how successful people have been matching when they receive X number of interviews. And so I would encourage everybody to take a look at that document to get more insight for their specific situation.
I'll add that if you're not familiar with NRNP's charting outcomes in the match, they have a lot of data where they show you all of these different variables that go into residency match success in terms of that specific year or data that they're looking at. So I'd really highly recommend, if you have not yet looked at NRNP charting outcomes in the match. It's open access. It's a very big PDF document, but there's a lot of gold in there.
Yeah, and I just sent that out in the chat as well. So if you want to keep that, you can go ahead and click on it. Are you guys ready for our next question?
What's the next question?
Okay, our next question is, what aspects do programs consider when ranking residents?
That depends on the specialty and the program, but a lot of the same factors that are used in making interview decisions are still in play when making ranking decisions. The difference is the interview becomes much more important than a lot of the other factors that were used for decision making for interviews. So again, you can go to the NRMP website and you can take a look at the document Program Director Survey. And when you look at that document, you'll be able to see the data for the factors that residency programs can and do use in the ranking of their applicants. So consistently over the years, the top factors have been your interview performance or criteria related to your interview performance, whether it's interactions with faculty during the interview or it's interactions with residents during the interview. And those two factors are much higher than the others. You'll see that when you review the document. And they ask program directors to rank those criteria on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not very important, 5 being very important. And those interactions with faculty and residents are consistently in the 4.8 to 4.9 out of 5.0 rating scale. And most everything else is nowhere near that. Reggie, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's very thorough.
Okay. And we have about 4 questions left from the Google form. And then we do have a couple questions in the chat. So I will move on to our next question for the Google form. But if we have time, hopefully we'll have some time to get to the questions in the chat as well. So our next question is, what is the best way to answer behavioral questions?
So I'll go ahead and take this one. If there are, again, we have a blog post on the approach to behavioral interview questions, and I would recommend that you take a look at our video on specifically the question that I did a video on was, tell me about a time when you were disappointed in your performance. And one of the reasons I chose that was because that's a tricky one to answer. So behavioral interview questions are predicated on the belief that past behavior predicts future behavior. So these are questions that often start with, tell me about a time when. And there are a number of different scenarios. Tell me about a time when you had to stand up to somebody in a position of authority, when you experienced a conflict with a classmate. Tell me about a time when you had to advocate for somebody that you did not know well. There's kind of an infinite number of behavioral interview scenarios. But go ahead and take a look at our before and after videos of tell me about a time when you were disappointed in your performance. Because the key to answering these questions is to understand that the question is not really that. The question is, tell me about a time when you were disappointed in your performance and what did you do about it? So that what did you do about it is really the heart of this response, because it shows how you responded to maybe a challenging situation and how you were able to learn from it, how you were able to respond in a mature, professional manner. And so behavioral interview questions are a chance for you to highlight some of those key skills and qualities. And I recommend a technique I call story banking. And story banking refers to the fact that you should create maybe 5 or more anecdotes. And one of my students, what she did was she took 5 index cards, and on one side she wrote out a few points about the story, and then on the back of it she wrote out some lessons or sort of what prompt it could work for. So some of your stories, let's say there was a challenging patient case that you saw in the hospital, and there were some challenges between you and your upper level, between you and the resident, and this is what ultimately happened. That might be a story where you had a conflict with a colleague, where you had to stand up to somebody in a position of authority, where you had to advocate for somebody. So one story can really cover several different prompts, and it's really helpful to have those stories ready to go, because in the moment, if you haven't thought about some of these different prompts, you might not come up with the best story that puts you in ultimately a good light. So I would recommend watching that video and thinking about doing that story banking ahead of time.
Did you have anything to add, Dr. Desai?
No, I think that's very well stated.
Okay. So moving on to our next question, it is, if an applicant interviews for both family medicine and internal medicine programs, what happens when submitting the rank order list? For example, can you include 2 different specialty programs in the rank order list?
You can include 2 different specialties in the rank order list. How you rank those programs is entirely up to you. So if you interviewed at 20 programs, 10 of which were internal medicine and 10 were family medicine, and let's say internal medicine is your top specialty, then you could rank all 10 internal medicine programs first, followed by your family medicine programs. Or if out of those 10 internal medicine programs you interviewed at, 2 you really didn't like at all, then you could, choose to either not include them on your rank list, or maybe you put them way at the end, even after your family medicine program. So you have a lot of flexibility and freedom in how you rank all the programs where you interviewed at. But yes, you can put both programs and both specialties on your rank list.
Okay. Moving on to our next question, it is, what happens if our ECFMG certificate expires and we don't match?
Yeah, so if you are in this position, you have to follow the rules of the ECFMG. So with your ECFMG certificate, if this is a certificate that has an expiration date, you want to ask yourself, when is that expiration date? What the ECFMG has indicated is that for people who have certified through the pathways, that they will generally be eligible to have ECFMG certification at least through December of 2024. Now, how that will change in the future is hard to say. I know there are ongoing discussions about that, but for any specific worries or concerns related to your individual situation, I would definitely direct those to the ECFMG.
Okay. And we are currently on our last question from the Google form. And that question is, if an applicant only has 2 interviews at this point, how can they increase their chances to succeed in the match? So I think we talked about this a little more earlier, but if there's anything you guys wanted to add.
I think those points that we went over, increasing the number of interviews that you will have by those very directed efforts, emails of interest that you send, if there are any advocates that can reach out to programs on your behalf. So, things like that will hopefully increase your interview number and help you raise your chances of matching. And then, of course, as we talked about before, with a person who only has 1 interview, if you have 2 interviews, your performance in that interview can be the factor, right? Because we talked about how important the interview performance is for ranking. So we had plenty of applicants, so many applicants over the last few decades that have matched with a single interview or a small number of interviews.
Yeah. All it takes is 1 interview. We definitely have some fantastic cases of students who had exactly 1 interview and they were able to successfully match. I will also say, in terms of this, trying to increase the number of interviews, I have seen people be very systematic in their approach, and meaning they are looking at the MD2B Connect post on, or a section on IMG friendly residency programs in family medicine. And they are going through each of those programs and they are trying to see if they have any connection to that program, or if their advocates or potential somebody in their network has any connection to those programs, or if they have a particular interest that is connected to something that is a strong interest to that program. So for example, if they have a background in rural healthcare, they might decide to target several of the programs in Louisiana. And what I've seen is people who really spend a lot of time doing that kind of systematic approach, one by one, trying to make any of those connections, and then reaching out. Even if you're researching 50 programs, if you can turn that into one interview, that's a great number. And you might not be able to turn it into any interviews, but we have seen people be able to get these additional interviews. So I would, if you have not already really thoroughly examined that list of IMG friendly residency programs, and that's a list that goes state by state. So if you have an address in if you have an address in Louisiana, but you've also spent a lot of time in Michigan, you can really start to go through all of those programs. That's just an example of something else that you could do. Samir, do you want to add anything to that?
That's very good advice. I have spoken quite a bit about taking the programs that you applied to and dividing them into tiers. So tiers of friendliness towards your profile and your situation. Because not all of these programs are going to be equal in that sense. So the ones that are highly friendly to your profile and situation, that's what you want to hit hard, those programs, at least initially, as you're going through your efforts to attract their attention. Because those are the programs where you will have a better chance. So I would also look at the list in a very strategic way based on your chances.
Yeah, and I know, for example, a student who, let's say, went to St. Matthews is starting to look at where are the residency programs where graduates from my medical school have successfully matched. And then, that's an example of a program that might be consistent with your profile. So that's an example of how you can start to determine some of that information.
Yeah, and I did also just want to add that the IMG friendly tool that we have on our website, we include information such as the percentage of IMGs in the program, as well as the step scores required, whether there's a graduation year cutoff, as well as if there's any U.S. clinical experience required, and if they offer visas. So that is available to you on our website as well.
Oh, see, that's a fantastic tool because that saves hours and hours of research. So that's very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you guys haven't already, I totally suggest checking that out. We are kind of running out of time a little bit, but we do have some questions in the chat. So did you guys want to do some rapid fire questions real quick?
Sure.
Let's go for it.
Okay. So
I'm going to answer for you, Samir. I'm going to answer for you, Samir.
Okay. Absolutely. Feel free.
Okay, good.
Okay. So our first question from the chat is, one interview asked me if I wanted to go back to my home country after residency. Is there a fixed answer to this kind of question, and how do you respond wisely? So
I'm a big believer in being true to who you are. So, if you're very passionate about something, you can really consider sharing that with an interviewer and a program. Now, there is obviously some strategy here because every program has different missions. And so if you're interviewing at a program where their big mission is to graduate residents who are going to stay in their community, then they may not, be so excited about somebody who wants to go back to their country. But it then depends really, on the strength of your conviction to go back to your country. Are you 100%? Quite often people are not sure, right? You're kind of thinking that's a possibility, but you might also stay in the US. So if you don't have that 100% certainty, then you may not want to come down so forcefully on I will definitely be going back to my home country. So I think to some extent it's based on, where you are in terms of your vision for your future. What are you feeling now, and is there some uncertainty? Sometimes when people have a high degree of certainty, their life changes and they see things very differently as they move forward with their career. So I think to some extent, this answer has to be based on where you are and what you're feeling, and also what the program is looking to do.
Okay. Anything to add, Dr. Kata?
No.
Okay. Our next question is there anything that is too enthusiastic during an interview, or can anything come across as too enthusiastic? For example, if an applicant wants to emphasize that he or she is very interested in the program.
So, Reggie, have you had any overly enthusiastic dermatology residency applicants?
That's a good question. I have had a few where I felt like it was not sincere. So having said that, I have also had applicants where they were extremely enthusiastic. And the reason I believed in their sincerity was that it made sense to me. They outlined their reasons, and it made a lot of sense to me why they were so sincerely excited about our program. So I think if you're able to convey it with sincerity and back it up, I haven't, apart from those few cases where I felt like they were being fake, I have not ever felt like somebody who struck me as sincerely enthusiastic was over enthusiastic. What about you?
Yeah, so I have more of the problem that somebody is not enthusiastic enough. That tends to be the bigger problem for me and for a lot of my colleagues. So there, colleague in Florida, well, he was Dean, Dr. Duff. He's also professor of obstetrics and gynecology. When he looked at the number one reason why people were scored poorly in interviews, they did a 5-year analysis of residency applicants to their obstetrics and gynecology program. So the factor that was on top for poor scoring applicants was did not show enthusiasm and lacked a spark. Okay. And so I also see that in internal medicine interviews. When I've interviewed for Baylor, I also see that in the mock interviews that I do. And so I do a lot of specific coaching on ways to come across more enthusiastic. Now, as Dr. Kata mentioned, it's possible to overdo it, but I find that that's not something I see anywhere as much as what I see on the other side.
I'll also add, it's interesting you say that too, because I'm thinking about one of my friends, and she's not in medicine, but she was applying for a job in healthcare administration. And she's lived in the United States for 20 plus years, but she's originally from England. So when we were doing our mock interview, one of the questions I gave her was, well, why are you interested in in this position? And she gave me a nice little response. And I said, what I would say, because it was her dream job. And I said, you should really just come out and say that this is your dream job. This is my dream job because XYZ, and I would love to work here. And it was entirely sincere. And she said, really, are you sure? Because I don't know, in Britain, that's really not what we would say. And I said, oh, no. That's a cultural difference. So in the US, most of your employers are going to respond very well to that level of enthusiasm. And I know I do, especially because she was able to say, this is my dream job because this is where I've been doing my research and this is what your job offers. And I would absolutely love to work here. So the kind of words I just used, I hear those all the time. So depending on your cultural background, also, you may not realize that that's something that your interviewer typically wants from you, is that kind of level of enthusiasm.
Yeah, and a lot of times when I do mock interviews, I will encourage my students to use certain words that carry more emotion or more power. I'll sometimes use the word love in an interview. Like, for example, I'll say, there's so many reasons why I love your internal medicine residency program. Or I'm so excited about I'll use certain words to convey that excitement or enthusiasm. And that's okay. Okay, because you can say there's so many reasons I'm interested in your program, but I think your choice of word can also have an effect on an interviewer.
Like that.
I think that's a really great point, that your words also matter, and additionally with your body language and how you project those words. So yeah, that's a really great point, Dr. Desai.
And Alyssa, I like what you just said about body language too. You can see when somebody's enthusiastic, they're leaning forward, they're more animated. So body language is an important part of that as well. Thank you.
Definitely. So on to our next question. We have about 2 more questions that we have time to get to. On question, which I think we answered a little bit earlier, but I figure we can add a little bit more to it, is how many interviews would you expect a non-USIMG to have at this particular stage?
So it's very hard to answer that question because every applicant is different. And then you have specialty differences. You also have differences in numbers of programs that people have applied to or the region in which they're applying to. So it's very hard to say that somebody should have X number of interviews right at this moment in time. I will also say that in this last year or two, when we've been doing virtual interviews, sometimes the interview invitations have been coming out a little bit later uh, in the process, especially as we're trying to shift towards a more holistic review. We're saying a lot these days, right? A lot of conversations are being had, a lot of meetings are taking place at professional societies, a lot of articles on the importance of looking at our residency selection process in a different way. And if we're trying to get away from this over reliance on numbers, then it's going to take more time to go through such a large volume of applications. And so last year, for example, I saw many interviews being extended in the month of November, which is what obviously we're in right now. And I saw more interviews than I typically have seen in the months of December and even January. I think programs that are virtually interviewing have also expanded the numbers of interviews in many cases that they're offering. And those are being spread out in some cases throughout the interview season.
Okay.
Right.
Anything to add, Dr. Kata? Okay. So we have 2 more questions I think we can squeeze in real quick, and then we'll wrap things up. The next question, which I think we can answer pretty quickly, is do early and late interviews affect the chance of ranking?
This is an issue that's been looked at quite a bit in different specialties, and there's simply no evidence that interviewing early or late gives you an advantage or presents you a disadvantage. So you can schedule your interviews without being worried that you're going to be affected by the date of your interview.
Okay. And our final question of the night is, if a person has applied to 2 unrelated specialties, for example, a surgical branch as the preferred and a non-surgical as a backup, does that come off as a red flag during the interviews? And also, should a person be upfront about it and bring it up during the interview?
So when you're going after a surgical specialty, quite often you're going after something that is very competitive. And so it's not unusual for people of all applicant types, whether you're USMD, USDO, or IMG, to have some sort of backup plan. And so that often involves applying to multiple specialties, usually 2 specialties. Now, is that a concern for programs? To some programs, it may be more of a concern than to other programs, because there is the question of, are you committed to our specialty? particularly less competitive specialties may look at your overall application and feel that your profile has been created to appeal to a different specialty. And so that might affect the way in which they see you as an applicant, because they might worry that if they bring you into their program in a few months when there's an opening in the surgical specialty, you might leave their program, which would obviously leave them shorthanded. So there are certainly concerns that programs have. Reggie, did you want to add anything to that?
Okay, so I think with that said, we can wrap up the webinar. I just wanted to say, if, before we start wrapping things up, if you guys could please let us know in the chat if you enjoyed the webinar tonight, or if there's anything you'd like us to touch on in the next webinar, we would love to hear it, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. So just from me, thank you everybody who was here tonight. We truly appreciate you guys being here. You're part of our MD2B Connect family, and we truly care about your success. So if there's anything you guys ever need, please feel free to reach out to any of us, including Dan, Dr. Desai himself, or myself. We're always happy to help you. And, you're more than just a number here. You guys are part of our family. So thank you so much for being here. And with that said, I will pass it off to Dr. Desai and Dr. Kata.
Reggie, do you want to say a few words, and then I'll say the final words here?
Oh no, I was honored. I was honored to be here tonight, and we really, Samir and I really are rooting for you guys when residency interview season comes around, and we hear from one of our students that they got an interview. We're cheering you on, and we just really want to wish you the best of luck.
No, absolutely. I echo everything that Alyssa and Rajni just said. We are 100% behind you. We've gotten to know you so well through this process, and I can't tell you how excited I am for your future. I know that this is a time of uncertainty, a time of great stress, but I know that you're putting everything you've got into this, because I've seen how much you put into getting to this point. And you all have so much going for you. And when you get those interviews, that's an indication that those programs see that in you as well. And remember that when you do that interview, they really like you. They wouldn't have interviewed you if they didn't like you. And now it's a time for you to really show them just how wonderful your personality is, all the things that you've done, what you have to offer. And every one of you has the ability to get that across in a compelling way. Now, you have my direct line. So if you have any individual questions or situations that you want to talk to me about, I'm always available. So you can always reach out. I'm happy to talk to you and give you the benefit of my experience. So that's what we're all about here at MD2B Connect. So I thank you for joining us in this webinar. And remember, we're going to be doing it again very, very soon. So all the best.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.